Kubor nakaslem jong udongsan Hima.
Katanat pulit ka jila menta kasingi kalai puwi terik ula bera raja rat pulai lapan long ya ka jingelang haluar ban pindo jat ya ka jing Khaïi Be-Aiñ ki Briew kabala khot ka state level conference on anti-human trafficking. Ka jing temu jong kani ka jingelang ka dei haluar ban pintip shiki pulit ginong trei ginong ket kam ya ka imlang saklang ki bedai khmi ya katanat ha ka bay dei bi kintai bat khalung khanna bat komta ter hapo ka jila ban penlong ya ki ba adakar ha ka bay dei bat ki an ki kendon halor kumno ki runar ki baju Khaïi Be-Aiñ ki Briew ki le ban penbiet halor kani katanat pulit ka jila Meghalaya kala penlong ya ka jingelang ka bashisngi ha state convention center Shillong. Hagani kasngi layo ka jingkaran na DGP ka jilla o Dr. LR Bishnoi haga baula ong ba ha ka jilla haba pai shi jingtep ki bahan rius na menshwa ki don tang khat khandai tali ki kes bala penrung ba na gini ki khat khandai tali ki kes tang lai ni south tali ki kes ki bala la ban Punjab ulo ong ru ba ka dei ka kam ka ba e ban te la kam ya ka kam Khaïi Briew bat komta ka sarkar pedang haring kat ka Supreme Court kala penya da ka an ha ka ba dei bat kini ka kam u Dr. Bishnoi laban rap ru da ka ba ong ba kinong snong ka jilla Meghalaya ki dei ban long ki ba adakar ba da ka jinglong adakar kala ban te la kam bat Punjab persha ya ka kam Khaïi Briew na lor Dr. Bishnoi layo jingkran ru na ka kong KML Nongbri director katanat Meghalaya State Judicial Academy ka kong Yamon Langs EM chairperson Meghalaya State Commission for Protection of Child Rights bat kiwei
the human trafficking, when we discuss things about human trafficking, many ideas come to our mind. Many thoughts bombard our minds. What is a human trafficking? Why this problem is prevalent in India? What are the likely causes for these problems? What are the factors responsible for the human trafficking? And what is the existing legal provisions to take care of these problems? How this problem can be solved in India? All these thoughts come to our mind. If you have interest in history, in the 11th century, the Al-Biruni visited India. And after that, in 14th century, Ibn Battuta also came here. Both of these travelers, they mentioned about the problems of the slaves system in India, where the human beings were purchased and sold like any other commodity. This slavery system is just like a component of human trafficking. And the human trafficking has many facets. The Article 370 of the IPC and the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act 1956, they have described the human traffickings in very details. So basically, I'm not going for exact legal definition, but it has to be three components in it. First is action, second is transportation, and third is the purpose. So the Article 370 has mentioned 5 or 6 action points. You have to take a person either by fraudulent means or by deceit or by the forceful means, like that, 5 or 6 factors they have mentioned. Then the transportations of the trafficking victims, the center or harborers, the receptions, destinations, and then purpose. There are many purposes why the human being indulges in purchasing and the selling of the human being itself. So there are many purposes are given, like the commercially sexual exploitations, bonded labors, the beggings, the drug peddling, organ donations, even the domestic servant. So these are the few purposes. So as per investigations, if any of these purposes one action, one transportation point, and one purpose. If IO can prove it in the court, then case can be convicted. But it is quite a challenging task, you know. Why it is a challenging? Because proving component, all these three parts of any components is not that easy. It requires hell lot of efforts by the IO at his levels, as well as the efforts by the supervisory officers. Then many acts are involved. The multiple of legal acts are involved. Those who are students of law, they may be aware that other than the IPC and Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act 1956, it also involved the Child Marriage Prevention Act. It also involved the Bonded Labor Prevention and Regulations Act. It also involved the Migrations of the Labour Prevention Act, Prevention and Regulations Act. So when the multiples of the acts are involved, then IO must be aware about the legal provisions of all these acts. So that is why the investigation is quite challenging in these cases, and the conviction rate is quite inadequate. In Meghalaya, if we go through for last 6-year data, only 19 cases were registered. 6-year data. And out of these 19 cases, only I think 3 or 4 cases were convicted successfully. So you can imagine the task is quite challenging and very difficult. Very difficult is as compared to the cases registered normal under the IPC Act. Very, very difficult for investigating officers. So that is why the government of India, the Supreme Court, the state governments, all of them, they have realized the gravity of the crime, and n number of provisions were laid out. The government of India, I think 5 or 6 years back, they have opened the Women's Safety Division in the Ministry of Home Affairs. This division was not there earlier. Only when the human trafficking cases were started showing increasing trend, then they have opened this division. And in the Women's Safety Division, under Women's Safety Divisions, there is the prevention of trafficking or the human trafficking cell they have opened, and the Joint Secretary level nodal officer was appointed to supervise the provisions of the Trafficking Act cases throughout India.
As I've said, we understand that human trafficking is illegal under the Indian law. However, it is a significant problem that keeps on prevailing and continuing. And yes, we understand that human trafficking covers various areas. What are the issues that would fall within the definition of human trafficking? Most of us, when we think of human trafficking on many occasions, we would think only of women, of children. We forget that even men sometimes are trafficked for many various purposes. Now, when we look at men, women, and children, they are trafficked in India for various reasons, for diverse reasons. Women and girls, sometimes they are being trafficked for commercial sex purposes. And of course, this is a rampant problem. And we understand that these attractions are being brought into the areas where children are very vulnerable, and they fall into the trap, if I may call that. And of course, we can think of forced marriages. We can think about areas where people are, they traffic children in areas where the gender ratio is skewed in favor of men. We have all these problems here. And yes, at the same time, we also have cases where people, as what the Honorable DGP has mentioned, going back to history, we have instances of slavery. Now here, when we look at bonded labor, that is another modern form of slavery, where people are being forced to work. Forced labor is a different thing, bonded labor is a different thing altogether. Bonded labor is here because people are in debt. Either they have been engaged in certain occupation or they owe money and they are forced to work as a bonded laborer. And of course, forced labor is also there, where people are forced to work against their will. These are all forms of trafficking. And yes, when we look at men and boys, they're also engaged as escorts in massage parlors. And yes, and even to the point where, you know, they lose their whole sense of identity, but are forced to engross themselves in this new kind of occupation. Now, children again, they form a significant number of victims when we look at this issue of human trafficking. Now, children, they are engaged as factory workers. At the same time, they are engaged as domestic workers. And also sometimes, or maybe in this modern day and age, they are also engaged as armed combatants, where we have these terrorists and insurgent groups. Why? Why are children engaged? Because it's cheap. Because they can be forced and mesmerized into believing that they are doing something to protect something. Now, all these are the activities that are prevalent now.
The first thing, of course, we don't have to define trafficking. We all know that we are already here. But I want to say that, just add further, that trafficking, as every other kind of abuse and exploitation, is a moral violation. It's a human rights violation, it's a legal violation, it's a social violation, it's a violation of, in fact, a very, not violation is a soft word. It should be something, it's something that is so deep it wrenches society, and none of us can ever be whole or complete. Because if one is fragmented and broken, we have a broken society. So this is something that we own that, with the pain of people who are caught in trafficking. And I want us to it's not they and us, but it's us with them. So then, as the previous speaker has mentioned, that this slavery and trafficking is nothing new. It's always been there, right, from the Greeks in the Roman times, and in India also, as been stated. There's something about power relations, you know, and the inequalities that exist in society that makes us enslave and exploit those who are vulnerable and those who have not. So this is something for us to ponder about, because if the inequalities were there at that point of time, they exist even now. And that's why these power relations and power dynamics and also the fact that we exploit positions of power still exists even today. So it's something that is that will be there for a long time, but we are moving towards, you know, a more greater understanding, and perhaps responding with better abilities and insight into this very, very important kind of thing, and a very heinous kind of situation actually. As has been said also, that trafficking is very lucrative. In fact, next to almost like side by side with drugs and weapons of war, it is like a very lucrative thing. Post-pandemic especially, or during the pandemic, it has been a very lucrative form of activity for what we call the evil strategists, the evil doers. Now the thing when we talk about that, we are talking about the fact that we have to look into society and see that, you know, if it's lucrative, what are we looking for? As Dr. Bishnu already mentioned, that there's a purpose. And one of the purposes that we talk about actually is money. It's as plain and simple as that. Because money is also power, just like power is whatever kind of power, it's a kind of power. But the thing is that we have to remember one thing, that we increasingly are living in a materialistic culture. Increasingly. Like we deal less with people and more with materialism and all that. And I want to point out something which has been mentioned earlier, and that is the commodification and the objectification of humans. we just look at them as commodities. So for the perpetrators and for the predators, they would look at, just like in a market. So when we think of the word commodification or commodities, we think of destination, we think of sources, we think of a whole lot of thoughts come to our mind. But I want to mention something over here that has been mentioned earlier. That is the role of media. And when we talk about commodification, we have to ask ourselves this: what is helping that commodification, the objectification of people? If you take a look at some of the films, the advertisements that come out, you'll find that there's a lot of people, personhoods, especially women and children, even children. I'm happy now the advertisements for where men are engaged also. But there's a commodification, the very fact that we look at them as objects. If you look at, selling a car, why do we need a woman? There's always these innuendos that are there, that exist. So we're bombarded on all sides by these messages that sex is good, that this is the ultimate for a lot of people, and then we talk about, yes, we can exploit people, we can use them depending on how clever we are, and the whole of even our songs, they commodify, they objectify, certain peoplehood, I said, persons. So this is something that we need to think about. Our culture is so bombarded by that. And I cringe sometimes, when I hear songs and even the language that we speak. We have dehumanized and devalued things that we should treasure. Women, children, even men. So that is one thing that I wanted to say. And then, of course, we find a lot of cases, some cases at least, which has come through the commission, and that is grooming that comes on, online grooming through Facebook, through WhatsApp messages, and through all the Instagram and whatever kind of mediums of social media. There's a lot of grooming that takes place, and young kids especially, they get fascinated by that. And I want to bring something here which is so pertinent, and that is especially the pandemic has taught us this and has opened up a new kind of door for us, and a new domain where we have to struggle more, and that is the impact of social media on our kids.